Getting up is the term used by graffiti artists to describe their success in making their mark on their city. According to author Craig Castleman in his book titled Getting Up from 1984, this mostly revolved around New York City and the process of graffiti artists that specifically targeted the subway system. Artists would tag subway cars, tunnels, and stations in order to present their name and their brand. The idea of people seeing their tag every day on their way to work was something that was just appealing, and almost just as important as other graffiti artists seeing their work and appreciating it. The world of graffiti is a cultural phenomenon, but almost more than any other medium of expression, graffiti is demonized and not usually respected by the general public. I mean, it's straight up a crime in most parts of the world, but that's kind of what makes it appealing to a lot of people as well. Given this context, some may also say that video games are also an equally misunderstood medium of art. Some people like Marc Ecko, a guy who took up graffiti art while in college at Rutgers University, studying pharmacology, who dropped out at the advice of the dean of the school to pursue art. He went from college dropout graffiti artist to founder of a massive clothing brand called Ecko Unlimited, and he founded the ever-popular Complex magazine. He's always had an interest in expressing stories about the culture surrounding graffiti, so when it came to making a video game revolving around that world, there was no one better than him. And in February of 2006, he released Marc Ecko's Getting Up: Contents Under Pressure. In Getting Up, you play as Train, an up-and-coming graffiti artist who lives in a city called New Radius, a city that strongly resembles New York, especially the subway imagery. It's a city that is a dystopian and totalitarian hellhole that decided to put a stop to all expressive art and culture, especially graffiti. Very Orwellian, if you will, although instead of sneaking away a diary in the wall, Train opts to use his spray paint to tag up the city in order to make a name for himself. And he's not the only one. There are many friends and foes that follow this same passion. The mayor of New Radius, Mayor Sung, hates this trend in graffiti and has decided to treat these vandals as if they were Class A threats to humanity, creating a special task force just to take on these pests, enlisting armored vehicles and helicopters to take them out, sometimes using lethal firepower to get the job done. Although if you live in America, it's not too outlandish to think that police would kill someone for simply spray painting some walls. Anyway, the story follows Train as he is kicked out of his grandmother's apartment for pursuing graffiti art. She said that's what caused the death of his father, and she isn't going to stand around idle while he follows in his footsteps. The death of Train's father is something that weighs heavily on him, but he doesn't know anything about it. It happened when he was very young, and he doesn't even know when or how exactly his father died. He leaves the dingy apartment building and immediately runs into trouble with a member of the local gang called the Vandals, clearly the troublemakers of the neighborhood, and for a good portion of the game, the main antagonist to Train. You start the game doing simple tags around the block and you end up fighting some interesting characters from rival groups, and even teaming up and making a group of your own with peers, and you find mentors that teach you more skills to advance your reputation. But as the game progresses and your tags get more and more impressive, it morphs into a fight against the system. Not just the cops, but the mayor and everyone else who caused this once vibrant city of culture to slump into a bleak, corrupt shell of what it once was. It gets out of hand really quick once Train keeps pushing to get his name up. He keeps uncovering more and more skeletons and closets that are closer to home than he ever thought possible.
They know I know, even though they don't know where I am. It's cat and mouse with them. If I ever got made, I'm a dead man.
There was a lot of hate around the time that this game came out because people thought that Marc Ecko was just making a video game to flip for a quick buck and didn't actually care about gaming. But it was actually quite the opposite. Ecko was incredibly passionate about getting his story out there. It's a story that he had in his hands for years, 7 years to be exact, but due to financial hardships at his business and struggling to find the right way to portray the story, it was something that was slept on for many nights in order to get right. He decided to finally take his talents to the video video game industry. The primary issue Marc had with making the game was he didn't want it to be cartoony or over the top. He really wanted the culture of this world to be the focus of the game. And this is where the game really found its personality. It isn't an easy concept to wrap your head around or even make a game about. It's not something that was really seen before. There were plenty of ways to make a game about graffiti and to just throw existing gameplay formulas onto this theme and call it a day, or have it overly stylized and cartoony like Jet Set Radio. But Marc was very pressing, to say the least, of the developers to get it right. The developers of this game, by the way, who are The Collective, a company who by all accounts was used to making games with established properties that were fairly simple to transform into video games. Things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Men in Black, and Star Trek. So they knew that they were up for a challenge and they accepted it. But needless to say, Marc Ecko is not someone who would compromise on his vision. The initial concepts of the game were way too gamey. Things like cel-shaded graphics, funky animations, and even things that bordered on science fiction, like Train having wings to get to certain areas and doing backflips and spins when jumping around.
Yeah, we had where he had a spray can, you would jump off a building and you would use it, to kind of slow down your fall, and that was a little, kind of out there.
Needless to say, they were way off base.
It wasn't really what Marc was going for.
Eventually they got on the same track. They created this urban and gritty world that people can relate to, and it was a definitive story of getting up and not only making it out, but making it a better place as you go. Once the main concepts and gameplay were established, everything else seemed to fit like a puzzle. The characters in the game were all really well rounded out, and most of them were actually based off real life graffiti artists to add even more authenticity to the game. People like Futura, Obey, Cope 2, and several more. These artists take roles as mentors in the game and teach Train how to do different styles of tagging, and offer guidance for him to get out there and make a name for himself. But it's not just these artists who worked with Ecko on this, but the various tags and throw-ups that you see around the city, and the art that you can do yourself in the game is the work of over 60 different graffiti artists that Marc Ecko got to work on this project. There's a ton of soul and thought put into every tag seen in this game. And as for the other characters, there's a ton of voice acting talent on display here too. For one, the protagonist is voiced by the great Talib Kweli, who I gotta say is not just goated at rapping, but he has a dope ass voice, and Marc clearly thought the same.
You just listen to his talking voice, I find it to be a really cool, distinctive voice that you can really build something around.
But there are a ton of other heavy hitters on the lineup here that really blew me away with their caliber and their execution of their characters. Rosario Dawson, Giovanni Ribisi, Brittany Murphy, Andy Dick, Charlie Murphy, P. Diddy, fucking RZA, and everyone shows up to play. It's a fantastic cast and well-written characters for them to really flex their muscles.
Well, I'm from a place called Fresh Off a Nigga's Ass, and you making me homesick.
Right after voice acting and graffiti artist credibility, the next most important thing was definitely the music, and not a beat was missed in bringing in RJD2. The soundtrack to this game just slaps, and it's sad that I can't really showcase any of the tracks here because they are all licensed songs, from the likes of Notorious B.I.G., Talib Kweli, Fort Minor, and Mobb Deep. But they fit the game perfectly, and the original compositions that RJD2 did for the background music are also really well done, and they tie into the setting of the game seamlessly. And finally, the city itself, New Radius, where this whole thing just comes together. New Radius is very clearly based on New York City, with a lot of tall buildings, bridges, and most importantly, subway cars and tunnels. A lot of the ideas for the city were also derived from Gotham City, because the city has a lot of dark shadows that as a graffiti artist you spend most of your time in, and there isn't anything pretty to see there, with thugs seemingly around every corner as well. Pairing with New York and Gotham was also influences of the Kowloon walled city in China, a very vertically built and densely populated city that no longer exists today. But it was a ghetto of sorts with staggering and tiered structures that were nearly unlivable, with everything just crammed in as densely as possible. But as for the influence on this game, it made for some really well done verticality elements that played a pretty massive part in the platforming sections of the game, and made tagging a billboard or tall structure that much more satisfying. The platforming was something that they wanted to show often, the climbing of fences or poles, and even rappelling down sides of buildings or hanging onto the side of a train car as it's racing through the tunnel, as these are things that real graffiti artists do in order to get their pieces up. And when Marc Ecko brought the development team to New York to witness some of this stuff firsthand, they were beyond impressed and made it a standout feature in the game to be showcased often.
And we would actually have to go on the wall so the trains would pass us.
While passion was definitely there during development, the length of time it took to make it a satisfactory product was ultimately detrimental to the game. It was originally planned for a Black Friday release in 2005 to capitalize on the video game Christmas shopping, but it still wasn't quite done, so it didn't quite make the deadline. So it wasn't until February of 2006 that it came out, but only on the PC, the PS2, and the Xbox. But at this time, the Xbox 360 had already been out for several months, so people were either already on the 360 train or looking forward to the upcoming PS3 release. And having a new game exclusively on these now last gen consoles was not really a good look. There was also the question of the subject matter of the game. At the end of the day, it was a game focused around a crime, that being vandalism. And in the process of committing these crimes, you assault several security guards, subway workers, and police officers. And sometimes it's not just assault. There are moments where you just straight up murder people. So this sort of lumps this game in with the Grand Theft Autos and other edgy urban games of the time. And while it's not a huge deal for developers like Rockstar, that was sort of their shtick at the time, for a small developer releasing an unknown title, it was not good. It was even banned for release in Australia, but that's not really that surprising. They seem to ban a lot of video games around this time.
Tough shit, mate.
Marc Ecko even tried to do some guerrilla marketing for the game as well, releasing a video of him seemingly breaking into an airfield and spray painting the president's plane, Air Force One, with the tag "still free," causing a stir in the media, even though it's obviously fake. No one is getting that close to Air Force One that easily, but that didn't stop the government from investigating the clip and just hurting the game's reputation even more. He even threw a block party in New York to celebrate the release of the game, with train cars set up for graffiti artists to come and lay down some art during the event, but this caught the attention of Mayor Bloomberg, who shut that down, fearing that it would cause for an uprise in crime in the area like pickpocketing. But eventually the courts ruled in the favor of Ecko and the block party was put on. But the media attention again did little more than just showcase the negative aspects of the game, ultimately hurting the game's name more in the public eye. But for better or for worse, the game was released, and like many others, I had a blast with it.
Sorry about your bag money. Here's a can of paint to hold you down.
The gameplay of Getting Up can be broken down into 4 separate categories. Let's start with arguably the weakest gameplay element in the game, that being the fighting. Now, the fighting isn't bad per se, it's miles ahead of the fighting in the last game that I covered on this channel, which was a fighting game. There are some solid variations to the combat, there are simple hits, some special moves like bitch slapping someone, you can jump off a wall and throw a punch with the rebound, and it's a lot like straight up brawling. There's even unique ways to finish an enemy. You can throw them off of a building, or you can use your spray cans like a flamethrower to burn their faces. I also really like the dodge rolling mechanic that Train has. The developers wanted to give Train a fighting style based off of someone who's really good at basketball. They deemed the style Dunk Fu, and I think it really shows with the rolls in this game. Train's dialogue is also a hit in the fights. I love after knocking someone out cold, Train will just drop a "my bad" as they hit the ground.
My bad.
The main issue with the fighting and the big takeaway from it in general is the enemy design. Enemies in this game are some fucking tanks, straight up bullet sponges, and you don't even have a gun. Even the most basic nameless thug or officer you fight can take several combos just to put them down. And then when you get into the several boss battles in the game, even with pretty diverse combat, it's like a 5-minute brawl and can get pretty repetitive and stale after a while. And the common enemies, in my opinion, are way too abundant with how much time it takes to knock them out. The occasional guy to scrap with is a lot of fun, but I usually wish for a waist-high railing or a window in the area to take these guys out pretty quickly using some gravity assistance.
Yeah, bite me.
Now, onto perhaps the best mechanic in the game, and that's actually the graffiti itself. It starts off pretty basic with some point and click bombing tags and some larger throw-ups that you can complete by moving the can all over the piece in a smooth fashion, trying to avoid overspray and drips on the art. The cleaner the piece, the more rep that you get for it. As the game goes on though, you meet with several legends who are real-life graffiti artists, and they sometimes teach you a new style or technique to use, as well as collecting spray cans and pictures of other artists' work work around the city to learn some new stuff, keeping all the cool sprays you unlock in a little black book. Eventually you can throw up stencils and stickers and wheat paste posters, and sometimes the special objectives in the game have you altering a piece instead of simply painting over it. These are usually pretty cool looking. I do wish there was a way to customize the sprays a little bit more, maybe offering a create your own tag option, but I'm sure that the limitations to the game prevented something like that. I also didn't like the objectives that wanted you to bomb a single structure or wall with like 8 tags, but it never looks good in the end, just a bunch of scribble all over the wall when one nice piece would have looked better. During graffiti, you obviously have to avoid the cops, workers, and even pedestrians, as they'll call the cops on you like a bunch of bitches. This brings us into our third mechanic, stealth. The stealth in the game is a little more minor, and it's often in subsections of a level where you have to dodge undercover officers and spotlights scouting the walls that you're trying to paint. The stealth takedown is something that I was very fond of, to say the least though. Train sneaks up on some unsuspecting chap and then beams him in the back of the head with a spray can, causing a one-hit knockout, making several areas in the game much easier to handle if you do it this way. This one-hit takedown also works on ledges as you're scaling up a building. You can grab someone close to the edge and just yeet them to their demise. Sometimes you may think that you're safe because there's just some homeless dudes hanging around, but soon you'll find out that these undercover officers really roll deep. The AI is pretty terrible when it comes to the detection in this game. You can straight up hit a dude with a basketball in the back of the head and he won't even turn around. And you could even sneak up right next to someone even though Helen Keller would have sensed them in their peripheral. The police are no better. When they are scouting a building with a spotlight, you have to creep in and out of the light while in the process of tagging, leaving fresh paint on the wall that these people are currently patrolling. I guess they don't really notice these giant letters simply appearing on the wall with each sweep of the light that they do. As long as they don't see you in the process, it may as well not be happening. And the final mechanic of the game is the platforming. It's pretty basic, as everything in this game is pretty grounded in reality, but you do scale a lot of buildings and overpasses in the game, with the occasional beam balancing and line rappelling down a wall. I did see lots of reviews claiming that the camera controls during the platforming were terrible, but I never really ran into any glaring issues with it myself. I really like how the level designs always sort of incorporate some kind of verticality, because it made the whole game much more full feeling. Especially some awesome moments like tagging the trolley cars on a roof of a building, or even scaling the biggest bridge in the city to write "still free" while a news chopper records the whole thing. This is the best part of the game right here. But as for what happens in the game, let's get into the story. And as always, I go pretty in depth of the plot, and so if you're interested in avoiding spoilers, just skip the next part.
So they crossed me out, huh? I'ma flip the whole script on them. I couldn't shake it. Everywhere I looked, all I could seem to focus on was spot after spot after spot, and how I was gonna bomb it. It was on, and the subways was my next canvas.
The game starts with Train getting kicked out of his grandmother's apartment. She knows that graffiti's no good for him, and that's what got his father killed, and she isn't going to stand around and let it happen under her roof. Even just leaving the apartment, Train is bombarded by members of the gang called the Vandals. They claim to own all the turf in the area, and Train isn't with them, so he must be against them. You get some relatively easy combat encounters with them as you make your way to the local park, scaling buildings and dodging the overtuned police force that's cracking down on graffiti in the city. Once you get to the park, you're met with your first significant fight with a guy named White Mike, voiced by the hilarious Charlie Murphy. After making easy work of Mike, you get to work on tagging the hell out of the park, both over Vandals tags and just on some fresh walls as well, until Train decides to take a plunge into Legends Pool, a place that only legends are able to tag, and he decides to throw up his name right on top of the name of Gabe, the leader of the Vandals crew.
Aw, damn, my bad, G-A-B-E.
It's not long after he finishes the tag that the Vandals show up and shut him down. Gabe says that they're gonna vamp him, which is essentially just beating the shit out of him and stealing all of his paints and supplies, which they in fact do, quite easily when it's 5-on-1. And they top it all off with spray painting an X on Train's back to further throw his reputation in the dirt.
This is real street bomb.
Once the Vandals leave, a guy named Decoy walks up and starts to give advice to Train. Decoy is one of New Radius's most wanted artists. He's a fictional character, but he is probably based off of Banksy due to his stencil style graffiti. He gives Train a can of paint, and with that single can, Train decides to get right back up and start hustling. Train goes to the store to try to get some paint, but since it's run by Tina, played by Rosario Dawson, who happens to be Gabe's girlfriend, she isn't so quick to just give Train some paint. She does flirt with him a little though, so it opens some doors in the long run. Here, Train also runs into his first legend, Futura, a real-life artist playing himself in the game. He's been doing graffiti since the 70s. He signs Train's black book and teaches you how to use it, to store your tags, and to take inspiration from others you see in the city, and essentially treat that book like your Bible. Train starts tagging over some Vandals pieces he sees in the area, continuing to make his name known, beating up any members that attempt to get in his way, of course, eventually hitting up the whole neighborhood and deciding to settle down in the abandoned art school as a new place to call home.
I'm alright, I'm good. The abandoned art school. Now this looks like a place to call home.
He finds out the Vandals are planning to bomb the subway station, and he decides to go and get in the middle of it, shaving his head and taking pride in the X that was spray painted on his back, donning a new outfit and putting another X there himself. In the subway tunnels, Train still sprays over every Vandals piece that he sees. He even flips some of Gabe's work, where he adds things like a baby bottle, a diaper, and a rattle, more disrespectful than simply just tagging over it. You soon run into another legend here named Cope 2, a real-life artist known as the Bronx Bomber. He signs Train's black book and he tells him that if he wants to get his name out there, he's got to do some crazy shit, like tagging subway cars themselves so people can see his art. Soon you also run into another dude named Cry 1, played by Giovanni Ribisi, a kid who was getting into trouble with a group of Vandals and you save him from getting his ass beat. He becomes a quick ally and leads you in the right direction of more tags and also a guy named Dip. As you've been tagging these cars down here, both parked and moving, you have been covering up a ton of work from Gabe's right-hand man, named Dip, played by P. Diddy. He seemed to have control over these tunnels, and Train's definitely taking a stand against him. He's a preppy kid who wears nice clothes, and with those nice clothes is a belt that he whips out and uses like Pootie Tang in his fight. It's not too tough of a fight, and after bitch slapping and literally kicking his ass, you press his face against the rail to get some information on where Gabe and the Vandals are. Turns out, he's in the meatpacking district, and even though Dip just got his ass beat, he still runs away and starts yelling threats at Train. This area starts the same as the rest of them. You go high and low, tagging up the places, bombing shit, and tagging over plenty of Vandals' work. Soon you run into Cry 1 again. He's been watching your back from afar, and he offers some advice on how to get into the meatpacking plant by hitching a ride on the back of a truck as the gates open. Train decides to make an official crew with Cry 1 after plenty of pestering. They call themselves the SFC, the Still Free Crew, as the name on Train's hoodie reads. Although Train doesn't seem too thrilled with Cry 1 just yet, telling him that his first job in the crew is to stay out of his way and watch his back.
I got a first duty for my new recruit. Watch my back and don't get in my way. Now fall back. I'm down for whatevs.
Train runs around the plant, covering up all of Gabe's tags, and he runs into a legend named Smith, another real-life artist who was sued by New York City for $3 million after he tagged the highest part of the Brooklyn Bridge. Dude's a legend for real. His only advice to Train is to remain unseen, as he isn't stealthy enough, I guess.
Try to lay low and be less obvious. I can smell your ass a mile away.
Okay.
Train soon hops on the back of the truck coming in and makes it into the plant, encountering first and foremost some sinister looking dudes working there, but you can also just lock them in the freezers to kill them, which is pretty interesting. After creeping around with the rats and the dogs, you make it to the main lair of the Vandals, a place of tribute for the New Radius Stunners, the basketball team the Vandals are obsessed with. Train decides to flip Gabe's piece there and gets caught by Spleen and Tina in the process. Spleen is the muscle of the Vandals. Dude has 2 pit bulls and a giant machete, and he's definitely not someone that you want to mess around with. It's one of the more annoying fights in the game, as it takes a long ass time to knock Spleen out. But eventually Train beats him, and then Tina tells him that he needs to leave before Gabe and the others show up. Back at the safe house, Cry 1 shows up with White Mike, the big dude that you fought a little while back. Turns out they are pretty tight, and White Mike is now the 3rd member of the Still Free crew, some well needed muscle. Cry 1 and White Mike head out to steal some paint while Decoy shows up again and asks Train if he wants to get back at the CCK. They apparently have some graffiti-proof subway cars that he wants to tag and rub it in the mayor's face. But as soon as you get to the street, Decoy just says deuces and leaves Train all alone. It's not long before the CCK show up on the street with a chopper and a SWAT-looking van, and Train wastes no time in spraying that bitch up. Eventually you meet back up with Decoy in the train yard, but he's acting really weird again as he's already just bombed the whole place up and then he just kind of vanishes. Soon after you meet the legend Scene. He tells you about the big buffer machines that they have for the subway cars. They clean the trains just as fast as they're tagged. Train not only tags up this buffer machine itself, but he also tags up one of these graffiti-proof cars as it's moving high speeds through the tunnels. One of the coolest moments in the game. As you finish, it arrives right at a station where the newscaster Karen Light, played by Brittany Murphy, is doing a story on these cars, showing off Train's biggest piece yet, mocking the mayor as a ventriloquist to the whole city on the news.
May I ask you, sir, what do you think about the new graffiti-proof cars?
Well, as long as it doesn't affect my taxes, I think it's a fine idea.
Jack, did you get that on camera?
This leads to a conversation with the mayor and the chief of the CCK, played by the legendary Adam West, and now Train and the SFC are on their radar and they're not too happy.
I can assure you Vandal Squad has leads on the inside with all these gangs.
I want this disease eradicated. Do it.
The next day you meet a new legend. Train runs into artist T-Kid, who teaches him how to do big detailed murals with multiple colors and different shading. And right after this, Spleen and some other vandals walk up to Train and White Mike and offer some respect for Train's throw up that made it onto the news. Respect given where it's due. It's pretty short lived though, as Gabe soon shows up and starts yelling at Train for being on his turf, even though Decoy is there trying to keep the peace. He offers up a battle between Train and Gabe, one-on-one, painting murals overhanging one of the tunnels in the city to settle their beef. The two go head to head to finish a mural first while rappelling over this highway while members of both SFC and the Vandals cheer out from the side. Soon, a news chopper with Karen Light shows up to film the battle as well. Train ends up winning this battle, but right as he's celebrating, the CCK shows up and starts knocking people to the ground. Cry One and Spleen both getting taken out by the police, and Train and Gabe escape. Train heads to the abandoned amusement park to rendezvous with Gabe, and it's crawling with undercover CCK officers. Eventually he runs into Aunt Beth, the leader of this undercover squad, and is hilariously voiced by Andy Dick.
Ooh, a tag team. I love the menage a trois. Next time I'm shoving your ass.
It's a tough fight. Aunt Beth is a big old girl, and even with Train and Gabe taking her on at the same time and dropping a giant statue on her, it takes a little while to win this fight. After finally taking her out, they discover that she had a bunch of paint and stencils on her from both the Vandals crew and the SFC. They've been causing this beef between the gangs this whole time, and upon realizing this, Train and Gabe truce and decide that the real enemy is the corrupt CCK.
Yo, no more beef, man.
No doubt. You gotta watch out for our own.
As the mayor continues to hold conferences and unveil new tech like a shiny new helicopter and a vow to crack down on vandalism, the now conjoined forces of the Vandals and the Still Free crew decide to head to the streets and bomb everything that they see in order to rebel, including using some of this etching cream on the new helicopter to carve right into the glass. Gabe also gives Train a strong side eye because he's been eyeing Tina, who is his girl. After playing some Frogger and murdering some poor dudes painting over graffiti, they start spraying all over the place. Soon you run into Obey, another legend in the game, famous for his Andre the Giant Obey posters. He teaches Train the art of giant wheat paste posters to send a message and points him in the direction of a billboard over the highway. After brawling with a bunch of CCK officers, probably killing a few in the process, Train and Gabe head on to another billboard, but soon Gabe starts to fall, in one of the most slow and deliberate looking falls that I've ever seen.
Train, shit, I'm falling!
Train luckily catches him though before he was roadkill.
I ain't trying to see a wheelchair.
Soon after, they are confronted by a gang called the Wrong Way Assassins, and it turns out that a lot of the stuff that they covered up on the highway was their turf, and of course they aren't too happy about it. One of the guys named Skate is played by RZA from the Wu-Tang, and it turns out that they aren't too big on causing beef, and they just like to make art for the kids.
Generally making shit prettier for the kids.
They leave and simply just tell Train to be safe taking on the CCK. Train and Gabe decide to head up to one of the tallest buildings in the city, to what is known in graffiti as a heaven spot, something super high up to get your piece seen by everyone. This building is like a hub for transit cars, and Train tags up all of them to say CCK is watching you, to let the whole city know of this corruption that's going on. Right after he finishes, Karen Light drops in like a superhero from her helicopter and says that she wants to tell Train's side of the story instead of just reporting on the mayor's bullshit.
People are gonna eventually wise up in this city and realize Sung and the CCK are nothing but a bunch of con men. They trying to get us to destroy each other. Still free, Mr. Mayor. What?
Yeah! B-A-N-R, what? It's our city too. Who's next? Maybe it'll be you, Miss Light.
Okay. And that's our special report.
Yeah!
The next day, Decoy wakes Train up and tells him a story about how he knew his father. He met him in prison and used to run the streets with him back in the day. Decoy is on some big conspiracy stuff. He seems to know what's really going on with the mayor, and he's the one tagging these cryptid stencils all over the city with the numbers 906. He doesn't tell Train what it all means, but he says that if he ever gets caught, he's a dead man. He's the mayor's #1 most wanted because he knows way too much. Train brings this up to Gabe and they think Decoy's losing his mind, but they decide to infiltrate the CCK headquarters to find out themselves. But Gabe is also curious to know where Decoy lives, because no one ever knew where he lives and he's a mystery, and Train's dumbass just tells him for no reason, knowing that Decoy is heavily wanted in the city. Train breaks into CCK with Gabe finding another way around. Of course, he starts tagging everything in sight as well. Nearly every SWAT van, the front lobby, and even the rooftop. You find Skate in an interrogation room getting beat up at one point, and Train busts through a window to save him.
I told you not to make it hot around here, man. What the fuck's your problem?
Yo, it's about to get even hotter.
Train finds an investigation board of all the graph artists in the city, with Train's mug posted front and center, and this makes him believe all the crazy shit that Decoy was saying. He meets back up with Gabe, who is wearing some CCK armor that he found, but soon they get ambushed and Train makes it out with Gabe getting caught red-handed. Train, still determined to stick it to the man, heads to the helipad and hits the chief's chopper with the glass etching cream before it takes off, severely pissing him off.
Rat! You damn rat!
The next day, a news report comes out that Train's grandmother's building was set on fire, and the main suspect is the Still Free crew, and more specifically, Train. They are framing him for the arson, and soon the police show up at the art building to bring them in, or to maybe just take them out as they just set the place on fire. Train makes it out, but the chief of the CCK, Adam West himself, decides to jump down and take on Train in a fist fight. Train wins the fight, but an explosion causes Chief Hunt to go flying off the building. Train tries to save him, but ultimately he falls to his death, the whole thing being caught on camera. The next day, people get scared and start leaving the crew due to the heat and now being wanted for murder of a police chief. White Mike and Skate head off, and even Cry One leaves Train alone, all while Gabe is watching from around the corner. People still think that he is under the custody of the CCK. He's acting real suspicious for sure, and the next night, Train even sees him in passing and Gabe just runs off when he calls him. Train decides to trail Gabe through the subway station to see what's going on, but Gabe turns on him, hitting him with the bats and getting the attention of CCK officers saying that that's the dude on the news wanted for murder before he runs off. Train deals with these officers and then eventually catches back up to Gabe and decides to fight it out now, since Gabe clearly flipped a switch.
We was cool, man.
Boys? We ain't boys.
After beating him and having him hang on for his life, it turns out that he ratted out all of the Still Free crew and even Decoy to the CCK. But not just regular CCK, some mercenary chick called Shauna, who threatened to kill him if he didn't speak. After learning about Decoy being compromised, he decides to leave Gabe dangling there and he just walks away.
I'm sorry, son. I had no choice. Let me up.
Decoy?
Just let me up, man. Rude. Gave me a number. We can work for her. Run shit, son. Come on. Train, stop playing.
Train arrives too late to a dying Decoy who tells him the story of his dad's death. Turns out his father took a job for Sung before he was running for mayor, a job to murder the competition to ensure that Sung won the race. But Sung also knew that he needed to cover his tracks, so he had it set up for Train's dad to get shot as well, to make it look like gang wars, ghetto crossfire, so nothing led back to Sung in the end. The numbers Decoy has been posting, 906, was the date that this went down, so he's been taunting the mayor with this knowledge in his tags.
I knew it was you at the pool yard. You look just like him, Train. Just like him.
The mayor is celebrating victory over Decoy's death. In his eyes, he's in the clear now, and it's also New Year's Eve, so it's time for big parties. But of course, Train knows it all, and he's as vindictive as ever. He calls up Karen Light and he tells her to meet him at the bridge. He's gonna tell her everything.
Bring your choppers.
I'll be with Mr. 906. He'll have a message for the mayor. Train, just give me a minute. Hello?
Train starts climbing the bridge, tagging everything under Decoy's name, and also putting 906 everywhere. But the main piece is Train scaling the side of the bridge with giant letters, writing "Still Free," as Karen watches it all from the news chopper.
With an exclusive breaking story over the new Radius Bridge. As you can see below us, the bridge has been named the Still Free Bridge by the elusive graffiti artist Train. This stunt by the street artist has reached the fever pitch as he once again evaded capture.
The news broadcast is being shown to the whole city live from a news blimp, and the mayor is on there as well to do his speech at midnight. And Train takes this opportunity to hop on that thing while it's refueling and tag the spots where the mayor will be giving his speech. This blimp is also where the New Year's countdown is going to happen, so all eyes will be in the sky. The ultimate heaven spot. He also changes the ticker from Happy New Year's to RIP Decoy. Never forget 906. After getting to the top of the blimp, he meets Shauna, the mercenary that killed Decoy, and suspectedly killed Train's father as well. Train tosses her over the edge of the blimp before taking a dive himself as the New Year's countdown starts. At 0, the mayor unveils his backdrop that Train tagged all over, and also flyers of the dates and the mayor's crimes dropped to everyone below on the street. There's no covering up this conspiracy now. Train runs into Tina in the streets and they share a quick glimpse, but Train leaves without a trace, probably becoming a shadow like Decoy was to avoid getting caught up in the mayor's firing squad. Or maybe he just learned that he can't trust anyone anymore. The game ends with Karen Light's news story bashing the mayor and announcing his resignation. Not getting arrested, but maybe that's to come later. Train in the end though is still free.
The legendary street artist known as Train was behind last night's graffiti blitz, and in the end is in fact still free.
Getting Up is one of the most unique gameplay experiences of the 7th generation, even though it was never released on the primary consoles of that era, the 360 and the PS3. The game was held back by its hardware limitations and really by the perfectionist that Marc Ecko is. If he managed to get this game out a year earlier on the PS2 like he wanted to, this game I have no doubt would be much higher regarded. It's got an amazing cast, innovative gameplay, and incredible atmosphere. It just got drowned out because it was too late to the game. This game came out alongside Gears of War, Bully, Dead Rising, Splinter Cell Double Agent, and the sales really reflect that. It sold poorly and the critics ended up giving it pretty okay reviews, but they weren't stellar, and this of course ruined the IP. Marc Ecko blamed video game geeks for not giving the game a shot. He wasn't happy with how the game turned out, and he wasn't happy with the gamers for not supporting it. He pretty much immediately vowed to make a sequel and to make the game that he wants perfectly. But after years and years of teasing production and even movie and TV adaptations of the story, nothing ever came to show of it. Once the publisher Atari went bankrupt, Devolver Digital bought the PC rights to the game and released it on Steam in 2013. This gave a lot of people hope because Devolver seemed like one of the best studios to take on making a new entry in the game, but ultimately nothing ever happened with that. Very recently, actually in late 2022, Marc Ecko is still buzzing about this game. There is apparently a movie of Getting Up in production. There are trailers already out and actors casted for the roles. He plans on getting this project out and revitalizing the name, while also saying that this dream of making Getting Up 2 has never died, and this movie may just be the spark that he needs to make the game a reality. This isn't the first time that something like this happened regarding the game, but this is definitely the most promising development that we've ever seen. And I truly hope that one day we see this game brought back to life and given the passion and respect that it deserves.
If we won't be heard, we will be seen.
I'd like to thank all the wonderful people holding it down on Patreon: Dr. Schwinn Dizzle, Kid Kingpin, Not Much, Anonymous Starkweather, Zachary Parkerson, Crash Bandicoot 25, Ben Stevens, Ice Ham Jello, Potty, Grand Taquito, Yay Man, Marshall Duff, and Scribe Slendy. And my YouTube members, THC Grey Wolf, Grizzly Wizzly, and Sexy Pickles. As always, thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time. Peace.